Welcome to New Frontiers, Health Materials and Design. My name is Alison. I'm the director of the Healthy Materials Lab at Parsons School of Design in New York City, and I'm joined by my colleague.
Hello, how are you? My name is Catherine Murphy. I'm a senior researcher at the Healthy Materials Lab at Parsons and a designer.
So we'd like to start with a little bit about who we are and what we do. I'm an architect and Catherine is an interior designer. And so we come from a background in the built environment. We're particularly concerned about our built environments, the places we've designed and constructed to date, and interested in how we fit in as people into those places. So up till recently, we didn't really understand that the environments that we've created actually have started to impact ourselves and our bodies. And so we've been looking into that and the impact of the spaces we create on ourselves and our health.
So you probably already have heard the statistic that we spend 90% of our time indoors. So in our homes, in our cars, in public transport going to work, and then in work when we get there. We've recently learned from colleagues in environmental and public health at Mount Sinai here in New York about the exposome study. And the exposome study is it's a representation of complex exposures that we're subjected to from the environment throughout our lives. What it reveals is that 10% of human diseases are caused by genetics.
Yeah, genetically determined, right?
That's right. And then the other 90% then are caused by environmental exposures.
Yeah, and so that for us is something of a revelation. Because if we spend 90% of our time indoors, and we know that many of the diseases that we encounter, we're subjected to as people, the result of our environments, the environments in which we live, we have a problem, right?
What we also know is that the US population is universally exposed to over 200 chemicals. And these chemicals are found in many sort of common day products like toys, furniture, building materials, personal care goods. The effects are so widespread that pediatricians and scientists refer to this as a silent epidemic.
And in fact, the body burden, that's called the body burden, right?
That's
and
right.
Those 200 chemicals that we can identify in our own bodies are just a small fraction of the chemicals that surround us. And in the US in particular, we're concerned about the 86,000 plus chemicals that are in these products, the products that we specify and design with, and our consumer products and personal care products. So what we make our places out of, what we finish our walls with, what we put on the floor, what we put in our walls, all of those things become really important. And are they safe? Are they good things? What are we actually using? And those are the kind of questions we tackle. And our research and the research of others reveal that in fact there are problems with everyday products that we take for granted.
What science also tells us is that as humans we're impacted at all stages of the life cycle. So wherever there's a human being at a stage in the life cycle, there's a potential for exposure. So not just in the use phase, which we might commonly think about in designers, but at the manufacturing phase right through to the demolition phase.
So one of the analogies we use as we talk about this topic is we talk about food sometimes, and we talk about ingesting food, obviously, and wanting to eat better food. We know that has a real impact on our bodies. But we also think about the clothing that we put on our bodies. And if we think about the materials that we use, that we go into making up our clothes, we could take a simple example like a white cotton t-shirt. We know that cotton is part of a complicated supply chain. And so a crop that is grown in the south of the US may go on a journey to a factory in Indonesia to be spun. It may go to a factory in Bangladesh or Colombia, for example, to be fabricated into a t-shirt, a simple white 100% cotton t-shirt that then returns to the US as packaged and sold back to a consumer in the US. So something which we would advocate for, naturally grown as opposed to a synthetically produced material, has environmental consequences too as part of this, the ecosystem that it's part of.
But thinking in terms of the life cycle is really critical too in our own processes, because there are humans involved at every stage of the life cycle.
Yes.
And at any point that there are human beings working with something, there's the potential for them to be exposed to chemicals. So around the manufacturing plants, you have what we call fence line communities. People who live in those communities. More often than not, they can't afford not to, or they can't afford to live anyplace else. They're subjected to all of the chemicals that are part of that manufacturing process.
And exposed to them.
Yeah. Exposed to them.
In
so
many
much
forms.
so that here in the United States, along where all the vinyl production happens, it's referred to as Cancer Alley.
So we titled this presentation New Frontiers. So what is this new frontier that we're talking about? What is the future of materials use? What is the future of architecture and design? How do we think about products in different kinds of ways? So for us, we like to say I think the line in the sand for me is a really good metaphor of saying it used to be that we practiced in one way, and that we now understand that was not the best way to practice. How do we make change? And that is our frontier, this line in the sand that we've set for ourselves. How do we make better choices going forward? How do we make transformation in industry? How do we make a kind of a radical shift in the way we practice so that we create better places for everyone? How do we do that?
But also to know that we're in a great position of power, just by virtue of the work that we do, like we specify materials and, we have great power, and I feel that we both have a great responsibility to specify healthier materials for our clients and for the people who are going to use the spaces that we design and create.
And that sometimes feels like a small thing, like, make sure that you specify better materials. But the implications of better specifications are really profound. Because small changes in one thing, to swap out your acrylic paint, for example, and use something like a lime-based paint, which is more benign. It's very, very low or no VOCs, so you don't have problems with the asthmagens, asthma triggers.
Yeah, and it's just, when you think about it, it's just the paint, and that's just one room. And then that's in every room, and then there's also the flooring in each of the rooms to think about. If you weren't to think of changing nothing else in a room, to start off on a project, that's a huge impact you have across the whole space or building that you're creating.
So we were going to talk a little bit about a flooring. So we like to look for alternatives, and sometimes there are kind of materials that have been used in the past that have been not used in the present, and that we rediscover and reinvent and like to kind of promote as a better product. And one of those is linoleum.
One of those is linoleum, and very close to the story that you told about cotton and the t-shirt. So linoleum is also derived from a plant. So we have the flax plant here, and the seeds then in the flax plant are these flax seeds, which are then ground down to make linseed oil. And linseed oil is the main component in linoleum.
And has better performance characteristics than a comparable resilient floor. It's also really easy to clean. You can just clean it with soap and water, so you don't have to worry about using harsh chemicals.
There's no chemicals needed that are added to it, And it has a much longer life. So less maintenance, longer life, natural product. So
all the things we want as designers or architects in terms of our performance of a product. So I think in that specification space, this is a really simple example, as is the paint that we were talking about earlier. But it shows the power of architects and designers to make change. We can start to specify better products, and we can specify the qualities of products. And sometimes we say we like to specify products without flame retardants, products without antimicrobials, products that don't have vinyl included in them, for example. If we do that, that has a way of kind of hitting any number of different products that are used in construction. So that elimination of chemicals of concern in the products that we use in buildings can have a dramatic impact on the health of our buildings. And that can impact industry then. Manufacturers are working now with designers and architects to create products that don't contain those chemicals. So therefore we have better choices. So we hope that in the next 5 years there'll be a range of products out there that kind of meet this healthier criteria, and we'll be able to kind of concentrate then on the spatial definition of what we're doing, or the ambience, or the design qualities that we typically are really concerned with. And maybe one day we can stop thinking about chemicals so much, right? And I think that's the innovation piece of what we're talking about, is really saying, at the moment, it might be that there are a few materials, and so we have to be innovative in our use of those materials. So we have to think a little bit more carefully and design in a way to ensure that we don't include chemicals that are problematic for us. That requires us to be innovators as designers.
What's really exciting about that is that if you have a limited palette of materials, then you really have to think about, what can I do here? So, what can this really great insulation material be used for beside insulation?
Yes.
Is there another application?
Can it be an acoustic panel, for example? Yeah. And a substitute for something that is potentially more toxic. Yeah.
Yeah. And then as a designer, then you can make something that's more exciting than you would, make if you were just going to put it in between two pieces of sheetrock.
So that's the challenge for architects and designers, to not be constrained by these limited palettes, but really to see it as an opportunity to do beautiful work with limited palettes. Yeah. But we also need access to resources and education to inform our practice. A lot of this material is kind of new to people. Sometimes it's frightening, it can be overwhelming. And so our work, I think, particularly in the creation of our website, for example, which we've been working on for the last 3 years or so, was really a kind of the first point of contact for many people. And it aggregated a lot of what we thought was useful information. And we created new resources that we hoped would be useful for architects and designers. And we hoped that we could translate and simplify in a good way this information to make it accessible and useful to architects and designers. We've also created a series of online courses that I think kind of lead people quite gently through this whole an understanding of material health, what this means, and is very complementary to existing kind of course material for architects and designers. For our own students here, it's something that they can use to complement their existing programs, and for architects and designers in practice, it's a useful kind of way of understanding this material in a very kind of staged way. So it's an introduction to the topic, the science behind it, and then how it impacts practice.
Because that's the real challenge, is getting access to the information, being able to understand it, and then learning how to use it, how you can implement it in practice. And from the e-learning course, we've relied on the expertise of leaders in the fields across material science, across medicine, across architecture and design practices, to help guide us through the changes that we need to make.
In a simple, accessible way, so that we don't have to be chemists to understand this. But we hope you've learned something from this presentation, and please check out our website. Feel free to contact us at any time. And we hope you come with us and you cross over that line in the sand and really kind of confront this new frontier of material health.